Hello and welcome to Studio RC, an encouragement for both your recovery and your faith. My name is Pastor Max, and I am an alcoholic. So this episode, we are going to start on a 7-episode journey, and we're going to take a look at some statements that are made by Jesus. Now, some may ask, who is Jesus? Maybe you have people at your recovery church campuses that are asking that. Maybe you yourself are asking, who is Jesus? Ever since his time on earth, people have questioned Jesus' identity and what it means and who he is. We find in the Gospel of John, one of the 4 Gospels that introduce and show us who Jesus is and all of many insights to his miracles and his thought processes. Jesus answers this question with 7 powerful statements. In his own words, Jesus tells us what we need to know about who he is. So for the next 7 episodes of Studio RC, we're going to have 7 of these. This intro will be the same each time, and then we'll go into a different statement. But we're going to take a look at the 7 I am statements of Jesus. Each episode will discover a different character trait of Jesus that reveals just who he is and the hope we can have in him. And my hope is that by the end of these episodes that you'll be able to see truly that Jesus is God, and that's who he's claiming to be. And he always has been and will always be everything we need. And how he both encourages our recovery through the scripture. And I find that these statements are so powerful. I got some of the teachings will be from American Bible Society and some other websites informed how I took a look at these 7 I am statements. What's unique is these statements are unique to the Gospel of John. We have Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, the 4th of the Gospel. And these 7 statements, Jesus begins by saying, I am. And then he fills in the blank of who he is. And it gives a different aspect of his character. And the phrase, I am, it refers all the way back to the Hebrew scriptures in the very beginning into Exodus chapter 3, verse 14, where God introduces himself to Moses with the expression, I am who I am. And this statement became a way to connect with God personally and was used throughout Israel's history to convey that God always was and always will be. Jesus is explicitly identifying himself as God. Sometimes people say, well, did he really say that? These are part of those statements that clearly identify. He doesn't want to leave any doubt of who he is. And each of the 7 I am statements follow this basic pattern. They're written basically as metaphors, and with each of the key element to the metaphor being that Jesus expresses, I am, and I'll share them in just a moment what those 7 statements are. Jesus always provides an explanation with it. So there is no misunderstanding to its meaning, and that it's clear to his listeners who Jesus is saying that he is. These metaphors often complement one of Jesus's miracles. They come alongside of it. And the statement and a miracle, they both contribute to the understanding of one another. And each of the miracle is interpreted by the metaphor or the metaphorical I am statement that Jesus makes. Each statement is intended to give the miracle meaning and context for the ministry that Jesus is performing. And they show us that Jesus' miracles were not just random acts of power or mercy, but that they were actions that demonstrated the meaning of his ministry and his teachings and were very intentional, as Jesus often was. Let me share with you the 7 statements, and then each episode we will take a look at a different element or a different I am statement. So the first one is, bread of life. I am the bread of life. Whoever comes to me will never go hungry. The second statement is, I am the light of the world. I'm the light of the world. Whoever follows me will never walk in darkness, but will have the light of life. I am the gate of the sheep. He says, very truly, I tell you, I am the gate of the sheep. Whoever enters through me will be saved. They will come in and go out and find pasture. The fourth statement is, I am the good shepherd. I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. I am the good shepherd. I know my sheep, and my sheep know me. The fifth I am statement, I am the resurrection and the life. The one who believes in me will live even though they die, and whoever lives by believing in me will never die. The sixth I am statement is, I am the way and the truth and the life. He goes on to say, no one comes to the Father except through me. If you really know me, you'll know my Father as well. From now on, you do know him and have seen him. And then the final I am statement is, I am the true vine, and my Father is the gardeners. You are the branches. If you remain in me and I in you, you will bear much fruit. Apart from me, you can do nothing. This sets us up for hopefully what is going to be a very fascinating, encouraging series on the I am statements. So without any further ado, let's go to this week's episode of and this particular I am statement that we're going to examine. May you enjoy it. God bless. And here we go. The first statement we're going to look at is, I am the bread of life. I am the bread of life. In John 6:35, it says, I am the bread of life. Whoever comes to me will never go hungry. A little later in the passage, it says, I am the living bread that came down from heaven. Whoever eats this bread will live forever. The bread is my flesh, which I will give for the life of the world. And so Jesus has made this statement, I am the bread of life. So we're going to take a look at this particular statement today. And you know what? We're going to do 10 minutes on each of the statements. So let's see how that goes. But we'll put 10 minutes on the clock. And away we go. Bread has always been a staple of the diet of the Jewish people. We can remember manna was the miraculous bread given to the Israelites as they traveled through the desert. Each year at the Jewish festival of Passover, unleavened bread is prepared to commemorate the Israelites' hasty departure out of Egypt. It's no wonder that Jesus uses bread to deliver this poignant message. He tells them, I am the bread of life. Jesus wants the people to know, not only can he sustain them physically by providing food to satisfy their natural hunger, but he can also satisfy their spiritual hunger. If they believe in him, they will never be spiritually hungry again. They will enjoy an eternity with him. Jesus is still the true bread from heaven that gives life to the world. Everything you need is in him. He is the one who can satisfy the deepest and longing of your heart to know him and walk more closely with him. I think this very much aligns with the third step from the AA's 12 steps. And I'm going to read it right out of the step book. It says, we made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood him. Now, what's really interesting about this step, and the real turning point for me in this step, the single word was care. We're turning our will and our lives over to the care of God. That's interesting because this statement is about how I can take care of you. I can take care of your physical needs as well as your spiritual needs. And we're making this decision to turn our will and our lives over, we're turning our how we do things over to God. We're turning the why we do things over to God in this third step. And it aligns very well with the I'm the bread of life. The moment Jesus says bread, his listeners would have been transported back 1,300 years in their national history. Each day during a 40-year exile in wilderness, God would provide bread from heaven to feed the Israelites. This heavenly bread was such a big deal, they made a point of celebrating it every year during the Passover meal. Jesus points out in John 6 that there are two kinds of food. Food for the body, which is necessary, but not the most important. And food for the inner self, the spirit. That's essential. And when we came to believe in a power that was greater than ourselves, and then we made that decision to turn our will and our lives over to it, we're acknowledging there's something more, and we need to fill that something more. Neither manna on the journey to the promised land in Moses' time, nor the loaves in the promised land in Jesus' time could satisfy the core hunger which Jesus came to satisfy. In the same way, for addicts and alcoholics, no alcohol, no drug, nothing will satisfy the longing. We have this longing, and the steps help us to yearn, to fulfill that longing, and we realize that it's spiritual in nature, not physical in nature. Today, more than 2,000 years after these words were spoken, people are still starving. There is a hunger that lies within each of us. And if we're not careful, we will look to be fulfilled by something that could never satisfy. For many in the recovery church world, that was drugs and alcohol. As with all hunger, what is quickest and easiest may not be what is best. We sometimes talk about those empty calories. Empty calories may taste good, but they never really satisfy. C.S. Lewis had this great quote in his book, The Weight of Glory, and he said, "We are all half-hearted creatures, fooling about with drink and sex and ambition when infinite joy is offered to us." We're fooling around with these things when actually infinite joy is offered us. Now, whether if that's, those are the things many of us pursued, but we've found that they don't fulfill. Jesus' bold declaration, "I am the bread of life," he connects the miracle of the loaves and the fishes to the significance of his purpose for life. Jesus is the bread of life. He nourishes people spiritually and satisfies the deep spiritual longing of their soul. And you know what? He's still doing that today. And if you go through the steps lead to that moment where he is able to connect. Now, there's no mistake that Jesus compares himself to the bread. And just prior, Jesus had fed 5,000 people with a few loaves of bread and a fish. Even today, that would be an incredible miracle. If that happened today and you showed up at like a concert or a sporting event and no one brought anything and everyone was hungry, and then this person, like Jesus did it, it would be amazing. But in Jesus' day, food was scarce. Not like all the food we have, at our disposal today. So it was even more incredible, the miracle that Jesus did. He knows that physical food would only fill them temporarily, and they needed that, but it was only temporary. But what he had for them and what he has for us is eternal, forever, long-lasting. In the Old Testament, God sent manna, this bread from heaven, to sustain the Israelites as they wandered in the wilderness. But that manna only met a temporary need. Eventually, all who ate it died. Not because of the manna, but like their lives perished. That didn't sustain them to the point of eternal bliss on earth. Jesus is better than that manna ever could be. He is the bread of life, and whoever believes in him will have this eternal life. I love that thought that I can sustain you. And I don't know about you, but there's nothing better than a good piece of bread and a little butter. You get that, you get bread with a little water. Oh, that's great. When Jesus said, I'm the bread of life, he is the best, the freshest, the most succulent bread you can even imagine. Jesus says, yeah, I'm that. But the bread you're eating, like the good stuff, that's only going to sustain you for a little bit. But what I have, it's going to sustain you for much longer. Just like physical bread satisfies some of our deepest hunger cravings. When you get to that meal, you've been waiting outside, been waiting for your table, you get in there and you get that bread in there and you're like, woo, and it just takes the edge off. In the same way, Jesus satisfies the longing of our hearts. He's the one who fills us, our deepest joys and our most satisfying pleasures. Without Jesus, even the most sumptuous pleasures of the world are empty and unsatisfying. We know that. We have found that out. With Jesus, we can be content, and even in the midst of hardships and poverty and challenges of life. Charles Spurgeon said this, and this is another great quote. I have heard of some good old women, or a good old woman in a cottage, who had nothing but a piece of bread and a little water. Lifting up her hands, she said as a blessing, what? All this and Christ too? The old woman in the cottage truly understood what it meant that Christ is the bread of life. He satisfies her even though she had nothing but a piece of bread and a little water. And she was like, and I get Jesus too? That's amazing. As we kind of end our talk on I am the bread of life, I want you to consider a couple questions. When was a time you looked at something that you truly thought would satisfy you and it left you still wanting for more? Think about that. Think about all the different times that might have happened. And then think about what are things that you can begin doing today to make sure that you stay satisfied with Jesus and not the things of the world, not our addiction, not our alcoholism. I think doing the steps, I think that's one of those things. But focusing on how we can stay satisfied with Jesus. One of the greatest ways is gratitude. My father, one of his important things that he would do every day is a gratitude list. He would write down what he was grateful for. When you remember what you are grateful for and you attribute it to the proper authority and the proper place of where these things come from, I think that it's easier to keep our eye on Jesus. So that concludes our first I am the bread of life. Hopefully you were encouraged by that today. We'll come back next episode. We're going to do the second I am statement. We thank you for coming to Studio RC. We encourage you to like it, share it, subscribe, comment, just interact with the post, be able to share it with friends so that they too can start to interact with some of this content. We thank you for you being here. And we're so glad that you're here and that you're watching what we're doing and that you're taking a notice. So we encourage you, let's keep spreading the word. And we thank you. And just remember, Studio RC is a part of Recovery Church, and Recovery Church is 12 steps and one goal. God bless, and we'll see you next time.